Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim, Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2 and verse 7. Now, we covered verse 6 and 7 in our previous presentation, but there are a couple of points which have appeared in verse 7, which were not covered in detail in our previous presentation. So I thought to revisit it, and I've called it part 2, explaining Azaab, that is the concept of punishment of the Quran. And this is particularly in relation to nations in the world. These are the references, and in this I have included the life in the hereafter. What does the Quran say? And a number of points which are covered here are also included in this book. And some aspects are taken from Book of Destiny. This is our contact. Recap verses 6 and 7, defining Kufr. After being introduced to the fundamentals of becoming muttaqeen, the Quran points to the next category of people in the world. This category is of the kuffar, who reject the guidance of the Quran when it is presented to them and do not feel any need for it. So the important point over here is that Quranic guidance has been presented to them, and they have a fairly good idea that what is contained in the Quran, and then they reject it. That means they use their volition to reject the message of the Quran. Like Iman, which is accepted after using all mental faculties, in Kufr also rejection comes after using the rational side of the intellect. As a consequence of this rejection, the human psyche is affected, and the Quran points to these effects, which include the blocking of hearts and of hearing, and not being able to see the aspects of guidance in the Book of Allah. This leads to adverse consequences in this life, which are declared to be a supreme punishment. We have gone over these aspects previously as well, that when we make certain deliberate decisions, then these things and those decisions affect our psyche. And as a result, our self either develops or becomes degraded according to the decisions which we make. Explaining the psyche of those people who resort to kufr, a stage is reached when any further admonishment and warning has no effect on them, because they have deliberately decided not to accept Iman and to follow instead the path of their unbridled desires. And of course, the path of kufr is important to understand for those who are students of the Quran, because as a consequence of this kind of psyche, the world around us suffers. And we can see that in a world of 2024. Implicit in this verse is the message of guidance for mu'mineen to become fully cognizant of the challenges lying ahead of them. This helps in understanding the man-made world and the human psyche behind it. Understanding kufr is intrinsically linked to understanding Iman and its acceptance. Because if people who have accepted Iman and they were living in a world where everyone has Iman, then that is not a problem. But we know that in the world, a lot of people will not accept the guidance of the Quran, and as a result will display those attributes which are related to kufr, and that will create imbalances in the world. And if these people possess power, then we can see that how much damage they do to the human world and mankind. An overview of the presentation. There are two ways to live life on the planet Earth: either to live life under the man-made systems in which the laws made by one man or a group of men at the top are meant to be obeyed by the rest, or to live life under the system defined by the Wahi of Allah and now preserved in the Quran until the end of time. And we have gone through some of these aspects, that the Quran takes out the human factor from the government or rule in the world, because Quran says that no human being has the right to give orders and commands, and it should all come from Allah through the Quran, that is in terms of its permanent values. If life is lived under the man-made systems, then mankind will face all those problems in the world which we can witness clearly today in world of 2024. Which is created under the guidance of the pure, unbridled human intellect. This human intellect can be the one which has rejected the guidance of the Quran and which is called Kufr, or can be that intellect which mixes the man-made laws with the values of the Quran, or is that intellect which is clueless about the divine guidance. The outcome of this intellect will always be the same, i.e., the state of different Azaabs in the world. And Azaab means punishment and the evil consequences of human decision making. The Quran offers us the roadmaps of both systems, i.e., the man made ones and the one based on deen as a system. These systems are diametrically opposite to each other. Under the system of deen, human life prospers and develops in this world continuously and acquires the ability to transcend physical death to continue its eternal journey in the next life. Few general points of interest regarding this journey of ours. We have gone briefly through two aspects of this journey on the path of deen, i.e., Iman and Kufr. We have seen that both require some deliberate action on our part. In the case of Iman, if we are not looking for guidance, i.e., do not feel the desire and need for guidance, then despite reading about it in the Quran, we simply cannot become Mu'min. Why I put down this point? Because we do see people taking interest in the Quran academically and for their own satisfaction or even for some kind of an abstract reward in this life and of course in the life of the hereafter. Under the religion, there is a lot of recitation of the Quran goes on, but we have to be aware of that. And we can only become aware of that if we have acquired Iman ourselves and we know what kind of a change it brings within us. And then we see that the change which we are experiencing, are others experiencing the same change in them or not. And then, of course, we have gone through some important aspects of law of requital, concept of Allah, and life of the hereafter, and the issue of man-made system and its laws. So all these things we have to keep in mind in order to understand what the Quran is trying to tell us in these verses. Becoming kafir is quite straightforward. We hear about the Quranic guidance from someone or read it ourselves and does not appeal to us, and we continue with our life unaffected by its words. And we experience it, that when we pass on the message to people, particularly those who are in the domain of religion, and they ignore it, or at times they react adversely. Some from these categories also start to hate what the Mu'mineen are doing and go against them. The Quran has frequently dealt with different facets of Kufr, which we see in the world of 2024 everywhere. Next point is, in the study of the system of deen, change in the human psyche holds the key to its success. If we fail to acquire Iman despite understanding it, and do not read about it, and do not do solid deeds with a view to bringing out our latent potentials that is evidence-based, then we are simply of no use to Allah and His deen. And this is an important point for us to keep in mind all the time, that the changes which have taken place within us, and we expect those changes to take place in others as well, if they have come to this path, then we should be able to recognize those changes using the signs given in the Quran. Acquiring new life within each one of us simply cannot go unnoticed, and with the passage of time, the status of Mu'min becomes established within us, and it provides us with the requisite patience, steadfastness, resolve, clear lofty aim, and continuous verification using the Quranic criteria and working together with others with the same aim. Now, verse 7, our choices impact our psyche and decision making. Khatamallahu ala qulubihim wala samihim wala absarihim gishawatum walahum azabun azeem. We went through these meanings previously as well. I will just go through it quickly. The consequence of this path of these people is that they no longer retain the ability to see and be aware, and to think and understand in the way that someone becomes insane with rage. Such dense veils of emotiveness cover their eyes that they simply cannot see the signs of guidance on the path. Their ears become so plugged that despite the ringing of the bells, they cannot find the way to the caravan. Such covers become enclosed on their hearts and minds that despite reflecting on the circumstances surrounding them, they cannot figure out the correct direction. All this is the outcome of their own deeds, which is established according to the law of requital of Allah. In this way, these people deprive themselves of the true excellences of life and sink into the hell of destruction and ruin. How painful is this end of theirs? And it happens over a period of time. It doesn't happen in few years. It can take decades. Analyzing it in reverse. Now, what I've done over here is I said that let us look at this verse in reverse order. The verse sums up the consequence of not using the guidance of the Quran and as a result suffering in Walahum Azaab and Azaeem, that there is a severe punishment for them, a severe penalty for them. And what is that penalty? We will go through it in later on in this presentation. It is normally translated as a great penalty for them. Theirs will be an awful doom. They have incurred severe retribution. Theirs is a great punishment. And these are different translations. This needs further elaboration so that we understand clearly the various causes which lead to the negative consequences of human conduct and behavior in this life. The verse starts by stating that Khatam Allahu ala qulubihim wala samihim wala absarihim gushavatun, i.e., Allah has set a seal on their hearts and on their hearing and on their eyes is a veil. This state of theirs will lead these people into some kind of punishment. We saw in the previous verse, that is number 6, that this condition of the human psyche is related to resorting to kufr deliberately after acquiring knowledge of the Quranic guidance. And since everything we do in this life has consequences, and when we do something deliberate, it obviously impacts differently and more strongly on ourselves. Another point of interest is why does Allah relate to himself some of the human actions in some verse, while in other verses the cause and effect is noted directly to human conduct. And this is an interesting part which needs a bit more elaboration. Let us first analyze the aspect of Allah relating human actions to himself. The definition of a law is if, then, always. In other words, if you do this or do it like this, then its consequence will be such and such. And whenever and wherever you do this, its consequence, that is, the consequence includes physical as well as psychological aspect, will always be the same. Whichever command, ideology, formula, or algorithm meets these needs, it will be called a law. So anything which meets this requirement or this criteria, if, then, and it always happens, then that becomes a law. And in the human world, this is not possible because in the human world, these things keep changing. It is only Allah's laws which are permanent, immutable, and this law is specifically applicable to Allah's laws. There are 3 types of laws in the world, i.e., judicial, physical, and permanent values. Judicial laws, these deal with the human court system. For example, if someone steals and is caught, there will be some punishment, which is usually a fine and perhaps a period of imprisonment. And that is, next point is very important. There is no link between the crime and its punishment, because that is why, for example, for even simple stealing, the punishments vary across the world. In one country, there might be a very severe punishment. In another country, it may not be. And maybe in a more corrupt state, somebody might be even rewarded for stealing something if that is a directed stealing. There would be no punishment if the criminal was not caught, or if one is influential in some country, he may not be punished even if he is caught. Physical laws. These are also called the laws of nature. For example, under this law, if someone puts his finger into fire, his finger will be burnt. Note that in this, the consequence of this action is inbuilt within the deed itself. It has not been imposed from somewhere outside. Continuing on laws. In the case of physical laws, the consequence of this action is inbuilt in the deed itself. It has not been imposed from somewhere outside. It is not the case that if a country passes this law that in our land fire will not burn a finger, then fire will stop burning it. Or that some individual puts his finger into fire in such a place where no one can see him, and so at that time his finger will not become burnt. So finger will be burnt irrespective of wherever one is. And whether one puts his finger deliberately or by accident, the effect will be the same. These are those laws on which the definition of law as mentioned above is precisely and fully applicable. These laws exist in their own right, they are not devised by man and are also immutable. And we can see that how much attention we require while studying the Quran, that when Quran discusses criminal behavior, then we have to look at it that how that criminal behavior is affecting individuals as well as the collective systems in the world. Permanent values. We come to the third category of laws. For example, if you do not help the needy, you will become destroyed. This is a very simple example of that because, for example, what is going on in Gaza or what is going on in Ukraine or what has gone on in the past, different wars and civil wars, all these have cumulative effect, and we will come to that once we come to Azaab. It is obvious that though this law meets the condition of if and then, it neither comes within the domain of judicial or communal laws nor within the domain of the physical laws of nature. These are called the divine permanent values because they are also immutable and are not devised by human beings but are established by Allah and are bestowed by Him through Wahi. That is, these are preserved in the Quran. And that is where study of the Quran is extremely important, and we pay attention to every verse and see what kind of a value is given over there and what kind of effect Quran is pointing our attention to on our physical side as well as to our intellectual side. And Quran deals with human psyche very frequently and telling us that what kind of a psyche is creating problems or good in the world. There is a dual outcome which becomes established through these laws. Firstly, the communal life of man becomes balanced, and secondly, the human self develops. Allah's addressee is the human intellect and reasoning. Scientists have discovered the physical laws, and despite seeing these to be universal and immutable, their minds do not comprehend the purpose of their creation and their role in the grand divine program. Because human beings at their own simply cannot figure out the purpose of their own creation. They need it from the Wahi of Allah. Some external agency has to guide us because we don't have any inbuilt guidance within us. Similarly, those who start to apply these laws in the physical domain and obtain benefits, they simply cannot take into account the equitable distribution of these benefits for the whole of mankind. Next is, in today's world, almost all people place God in the outer world, who has nothing to do with the human world, and since they assume that in the human world it is their own laws which should be established, hence the question of following the permanent values never arises. So then it is quite meaningless to say somebody is an atheist or somebody is theist, because in the religious world they also have some kind of a concept of God, but all these concepts are not the same as the concept given in the Quran, because the Quranic concept of Allah is factual. It is evidence-based. And as a consequence of following that concept, acquiring that concept, human psyche changes, and when human psyche changes, the outer world changes. All the imbalances which we witness in the world are based on this kind of mentality. Next point is, the Quran places the stark facts before us and tells us that the creation of man is for a supreme purpose of serving as a junior companion of Allah to participate in His creative process and take this from this physical world to the next life. Because Quran is putting extreme emphasis on us to pause and reflect and think through the issue. And since life is one-way street, it is inviting us repeatedly to look at the purpose of our creation, and then it helps us to define a lofty aim before us where we become a companion with Allah to turn this world into a new creation. Every cause has an effect. Allah relates some causes to His laws and some to Himself. When Allah declared in this verse, Allahu waliyul lazina amanu yukhrijuhum minal zulumati ilan nur, it means that this equation is now continuous and for all times. It is not the companionship of a fair weather friend only. And a very important verse, because the verse before that says that there is no compulsion in deen. That once we have come into the light, then we should be able to not only recognize this light and our own existence within this light, but we should also see the darkness in which others are living who have rejected this message or who haven't approached the Quran yet. In another verse, Quran says, Allah inna awliyallahi la khawfun alayhim wa lahum yahzanun. And then Allah states that after this companionship reaches a high maturity, that is over here, very important that once we become junior companion in order to carry out all those duties and responsibilities which Allah has noted in the Quran, and these are the responsibility and duties of mu'mineen who have opted, who have voluntarily become companion of Allah, that they will have no fear and no huzn. Because even if khawf and huzn exists in the man-made system, they will understand the psyche behind it. They will understand what are the causes behind it. And then since they have acquired the iman, they know 100% that they will get help in order to establish the system of deen. And as a consequence of this, following this path of Sirat al-Mustaqim, if we remember in Surah Al-Fatiha, these mu'mineen have supplicated to Allah, Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim, Sirat al-Lazina an'amta alayhim, that the path of those who were blessed in the past. And then they come to the next part, Inna Allah ashtara minal mu'minina anfusahum wa amwalahum bi anna Allahumul jannata. They enter into a covenant with Allah that we give our life and our possessions to you, and in return we will be benefited with the system of deen. This essentially means that without the correct concept of Allah, which includes all His attributes and their understanding, the human self cannot develop to that level which is required for the establishment of the system of deen. And we have to come to terms with this covenant and these aspects. These might appear very difficult and daunting initially, but if we pay attention to them and then stay together and discuss these things, then all that initial reluctance disappears gradually, because the signs start appearing in our life. First, of course, the change within us, and then, of course, further physical signs also appear in our life. In this verse, that is 2:7, by stating, Khatamallahu ala qulubihim wala samihim wala absarihim gishavatun. Allah has asked us to cross-reference this statement with other ones. And for example, there is another verse which I've quoted over here, and this was quoted, I think, in the previous presentation as well. فَبِمَا نَقْزِهِمْ مِيثَاقَهُمْ وَكُفْرِهِمْ بِآيَاتِ اللَّهِ وَقَتْلِهِمُ الْأَنْبِيَاءَ بِغَيْرِ حَقٍّ وَقَوْلِهِمْ قُلُوبُنَا غُلْفٌ بَلْ طَبَعَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهَا بِكُفْرِهِمْ. In that they broke their covenant, they rejected the signs of Allah, they slew the messengers against Haqq, that they said, our hearts are wrapped, nay, Allah has set a seal on their hearts because of their kufr. And over here, it is very clear that whatever they are doing over here is leading them to kufr. And that is important, that whatever we do has consequences. The meanings of khatam and tabah. The words khatam and tabah have appeared in verses like Khatamallahu ala qulubihim. When you fill a bottle with something and close it with a cork, and then for further security also place a seal on it, this is called khatama, i.e. to close something completely. From this, the meaning of the finality of messengerhood will also become clear. And we can look at this verse which I have quoted here. Sometimes we close an envelope and seal it with wax, and then using a stamp engrave our name in it. Doing this is called tabah. The issue is the same, i.e. to close something in such a way that nothing can enter it. Let us see how this state of the human heart becomes like this, that state in which nothing of knowledge and reason can enter. It is stated in Surah Al-Mu'min about Pharaoh and his companions, such as dispute about the signs of Allah without any authority that has reached them. Grievous and odious is such conduct in the sight of Allah and of the mu'mineen. And see, over here the Quran says, the mu'mineen are also looking at it. They have to be fully alive that what is going on within their own psyche and what is going on in the psyche of others. And obviously, we can only learn that by learning the Quran. Thus does Allah seal up every heart of arrogant and obstinate transgressors, And I have highlighted over here in this verse, kazalika, that is, it will always happen like that. It is not that it will be an exception that one's heart will not be sealed and another's heart will be sealed. Yatba'ullahu ala kulli kalbe mutakabbirin jabbarin. Now continuing, since the Quran is for those who accept Iman and then wish to tread on this path as per their strong desire to do so, hence they need to relate all their actions to Allah, remembering they got their intellect free. And that is important. We have gone through this aspect previously as well, that all of us as human beings, we get our intellect free. And then whatever they do and earn needs to be related back to Allah, so that all those responsibilities which Allah has taken on Himself in relation to human world are carried out by them under the guidance of the Quran. So it means that wherever Allah relates to Himself, we should pick up all those verses and say that Allah is relating to Himself, because now it is our duty to carry out all those tasks, because Allah wants us to carry out those tasks. And this is something which is very important and should become part of our psyche, that we have taken certain responsibilities voluntarily because we are not happy with the man-made system and we would like to have a new creation in the world of the system of deen. And for that we need a new life within us. And this is a way to create that new life and then strengthen it. For the implementation of every law, there needs to be an authority behind it. Hence, the Quran employed both styles to ensure that we become familiar with the reality of the functioning of these laws. And we over here means those who are seeking the guidance of Allah and have become mu'mineen. For example, human hearts will become sealed when kufr is displayed after understanding the guidance of the Quran. Since it is the book of Allah, hence He will seal their hearts as per law if its guidance is rejected. And we see that being displayed across the world. And a lot of people study the Quran, but they don't come to the Quran. They don't come to the system of deen. So their hearts are sealed. Or whoever rejects His guidance, his heart becomes sealed. The consequence of this is blindness. And this is not the blindness of seeing through our eyes. This is an intellectual blindness. This is willful blindness. And there is a lot written on willful blindness. And we can in fact Google it, leading to suffering in this life and no life in the hereafter. Such minds, if come into power, they create chaos, injustice, imbalance, and bloodshed in the world. How much Quran is saving our time by taking us away from these distractions. That if people don't come to the Quran, we shouldn't complain about it. We should straight away understand that this is the way Allah's laws work. Next point is, Allah has explained this evidence-based procedure to mu'mineen and muttaqeen so that they know how kufr impacts the human psyche. And then the Quran explains the procedure to deal with this aspect of the human psyche. Another important point over here is that since we have come to the Quran deliberately, we can also look at the kind of psyche we had before coming to the Quran, and we can differentiate between the two very easily. Finally, a finer aspect for the contemplation of mu'mineen. All these verses where Allah has related human actions towards Himself are for the comprehension of Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen, who are invited to view their decision-making and actions as from Allah. If we remember, Mu'mineen voluntarily enter into a contract with Allah where they willingly hand over, after acquiring Iman, their life and possessions for the cause of Allah in this world. And this becomes very easy because if we look at the world of 2024 and are upset about all the misery and poverty and wars and conflicts and uncertainty created by man-made system, then we need to look at that what Allah is expecting out of us as junior companion in this world. And since all His tasks, all His system of deen has to be established through the human hands, then it becomes easier for us to go through this covenant and its two conditions. This essentially means that everything they are doing is being related to Allah by their own selves. This is a tangible sign of change within their psyche, which now comes to grips fully with their firm conviction of having acquired precisely that Iman to which the Quran has pointed our attention from the beginning to the end, and which is the opposite of Kufr. Next is, hence when Allah says that seals are imposed on their hearts and minds by Allah, i.e. His law, it means that mu'mineen need to understand the whole process of this kufr, and which includes shirk, hypocrisy, lies, deception, tyranny, injustice, and the list is very long. And as we go through various verses, we can pick up all those negative points. And its impact in the world which belongs to Allah. Mu'mineen must know what happens when hearts are sealed and what kind of world these people create, i.e., a world full of conflicts, disorder, bloodshed, slavery, false propaganda, parties, sectarianism. And again, the list is very long. And we have gone through these aspects when we explained the conduct of Iblis and Shaitan. Hence, mu'mineen need to become insightful and start to relate to Allah all that they do, and this fact should become evidently clear to them that it is Allah who does everything in the human world through them. Now we go to the next topic of this presentation, elaborating Azaabun Azaeem, supreme punishment, and setting the scene for this. The frequency with which the word Azaab has appeared in the Quran, it is with the same frequency and intensity that its erroneous concept is prevalent among us. First of all, that among us, Azaab only commences after death, from the grave. And that is why these terms are used, Azaab of the grave, Azaab of Hashar, Azaab of Jahannam. And the depiction of this Azaab in the minds is as though policemen are hanging a criminal upside down, skinning him or marking his skin with hot metallic rods, and he is shrieking and wailing with this unbearable agony. And none of this happens in this Azaab, because this Azaab comes to us through our own hands. As far as worldly Azaab is concerned, its position is like this, that if there is an earthquake somewhere, then it is said that this is an Azaab from Allah. If there are floods, then it is an Azaab from Allah. And this is very frequently mentioned among the sectarian Islam. If there is no rain, then this is also an Azaab from Allah. If an epidemic of plague or cholera occurs, then this is an Azaab from Allah. And of course, in this respect, we know that pandemics nowadays human beings do create, so they create Azaab themselves as well. But the form of this Azaab is strange. The criminal or villain happens to be in London and the earthquake occurs in Mexico. Debauchery and depravity take place in Russia and floods appear in Pakistan, i.e., if such types of catastrophes occur in some part of the world, it is said that this is an Azaab from Allah which has appeared due to crimes and evil. And for protection or alleviation, it is ordained that you, that is the addressees, should seek the forgiveness of Allah. And for that forgiveness, there are some kind of tasbihs and some kind of counting of beads among religious folks. Ask for forgiveness for your sins so that this Azaab of Allah can be removed. Next slide is the meaning of Azaab. In verse 1:5 of Surah Al-Fatiha, according to the Quran, the concept of life is dynamic. It neither moves in circles nor is it static. By traversing through various evolutionary stages, life has reached the status of Adam from its initial point. This destination is not the ultimate end of the journey. In order to pass through further evolutionary stages, it has to advance forward. And this process also continues beyond death. In fact, you could say that only the initial phase of the lengthy process of the evolution of Adam has commenced. It is evident from this that the onward continual progression of life is its success, and its becoming static at some point is its extreme failure and despair. As long as life remains like a babbling stream, it is life. So if there is a stagnancy in our life, that means we are stuck now. And that is why people intellectually as well, if they have started going into circles and they have accumulated so much wealth and they have nothing else to do, that means they are in a state of stagnancy. When it halts somewhere, becoming a stagnant pond, then its fundamental characteristic, that is flowing, firstly becomes restricted, and after this it ceases. The Quran has termed life becoming static at some point as being Azaab. Among the Arabs, due to the aridness and intensity of the heat of the deserts, their animals had to remain thirsty. And on many occasions, the intensity of thirst used to reach to such an extent that the animal would even give up eating and drinking. And this is an important point in terms of understanding the term Azaab. And in this way, the ability to move around no longer remained within it. This condition of its was termed as Azaab. It is from this respect that the Quran has called Jahannam as being Jaheem. The meaning of Jaheem is an impediment or to become an obstruction. And we can understand as students of the Quran that what it means to keep moving forward. And of course, initially it affects human psyche, which attains a higher eminence, higher loftiness through the Quran. Azaeem, bone is called Azam. This has fundamental importance in our body. And it also means big, strong, severe matter or event, something of fundamental importance. So wherever word Azaeem is used, because it is also used in relation to the Quran, that Al-Quranul Azaeem, and what it means is that it covers both aspects, that is human psychological and physical as well. So when Quran says Azabun Azaeem, it means that the whole system of human beings are affected by this. It is not that there are any exceptions. If there is a fear in the world, everyone will become fearful. Even those people who create fear, they themselves also become fearful. Next is the case of natural disasters. The Quran has mentioned these kinds of disasters in connection with the circumstances and condition of former nations. What its correct interpretation is and what the connection and relationship is between the deeds of nations and these kinds of physical disasters, details of these will be given at their respective places. In fact, we have covered some aspects of it, for example, under Surah Hud, with respect to the destruction of various nations which are noted in the Quran. As far as the modern era is concerned, it is obvious that these kinds of natural disasters keep occurring in every country. Those countries which take precautionary measures in the light of scientific research remain protected from their disastrous effects. Those who do not do this become destroyed or suffer more damage and losses. Human knowledge is gradually progressing forward. As a result of this, he has overcome many of these kinds of disasters. He will overcome the rest as well. When Allah informed man that we have subjugated the system of the universe to your control, what this means is that man was bestowed with this ability that he could harness the forces of nature, and details of this will appear later. Hence, to state about these kinds of universal disasters that Allah makes men suffer in an Azaab due to their sins is incorrect. More on natural disasters. What happens is that due to contravention of the divine principles and values, the morals of a nation deteriorate. The foremost consequence of this is that the concept of justice disappears from this nation. And this has to disappear because there is no concept of the hereafter and the law of requital and the concept of Allah in that. Because the whole issue of these people, that is man-made system, is that they think that the life will end with death and they want to only concentrate on their own desires, irrespective of the fact that how their evil desires affect others. This nation, first of all, adopts this practice of injustice against other nations and keeps promoting it by terming it as the fervor of patriotism. And patriotism is another form of God. Gradually, these germs also penetrate within their own selves, and in this way, lawlessness spreads in this society, the consequence of which is chaos and conflict in every facet of life. And we can see that how the nationalism has affected our world of today. And that is why every nation is concentrating on their own self-interest and is ready to exploit others for this self-interest. This also affects their organization and management, the outcome of which is that that nation simply does not remain capable of facing natural disasters. Because if human psyche is faulty and has evil filled up in that psyche, then how are they going to look at the long-term effects of not doing good for others? This is the link between the moral decline of nations and the devastations resulting from natural universal events. In other words, natural disasters, for example, floods, earthquakes, etc., do not result from human sins. these materialize according to the laws of nature. And a lot of these damages of earthquakes and floods are done because we have drawn lines on the planet Earth. And people suffering in one area, like Bangladesh, because of flooding, they cannot go to other countries where there is no flooding. The consequence of human sins due to transgression of moral values is that this nation neither retains the ability to counter and mitigate these natural disasters, nor has the potential to rectify the subsequent devastation resulting from these events. And we see this aspect, for example, in America at present. The country is spending loads of money in foreign wars, but is not spending anything substantial on infrastructure within the country. The Quran invites us to continuously reflect, reason, and investigate everything on the planet, i.e., both psychological and physical, and understand the cause and effect connection. This word and our life in it is the arena of executing our choice and intent to its fullest extent. The best can only come out if it is carried out within the guidance of the Quran. Next slide is humiliation and disgrace is also a form of Azaab. The Quran has described various forms and characteristics of Azaab, stating Azaab-Azeem, a very severe punishment at some places, and Azaab-Aleem, a very painful punishment at other places. For us, the severest and worst form is that which it has termed as Azabun Muheen, a humiliating Azaab. The reality is that if the honor and self-respect of a nation is not completely dead, then there can be no punishment more chastising and destructive than that of humiliation and disgrace. And we have that sense of respect and dignity inbuilt within each one of us because of our choice and intent. And if that is hurt, then we become subhuman. And those who do that, they also become subhuman. It has reiterated this fact at a number of places in the account of Bani Israel. Shame is pitched over them like a tent wherever they are found. And we can see that in today's world, what is happening in Palestine, those who are doing all those injustices and tyranny and bloodshed, it is affecting their psyche as well. And we can see the demonstration of that evil psyche, that they are also not living under peace. They have created fear for themselves. They have created huzn and uncertainty for themselves as well. So in this Azaab, everyone is caught. When dynamism no longer remains in a nation and it stagnates at some place, then the consequence of this is that ruin and destruction which the Quran has termed as Azaab. It is on this basis that the Quran also calls this maskanat, along with humiliation when explaining the Azaab in which the nation of Bani Israel was gripped, i.e., that their grandeur and greatness was converted into humiliation and lowliness, and their dynamism and energy became static and frozen. They had Iman in one part of the divine code and used to reject the other part. And the Quran says, then is it only a part of the book that you have Iman in? And do you reject the rest? That is, you follow some of the rituals given in it, but you reject the rest of the Quran, which puts forward the system of deen. But what is the reward for those among you who behave like this, but disgrace in this life? And we can see plenty of humiliation and disgrace in every part of the world. And on the day of judgment, they shall be consigned to the most grievous penalty. Because the issue before humanity is that hereafter exists, the law of requital exists, and law of requital and the hereafter is not going to disappear just because we do not have Iman in that. And the consequence is that not having Iman in these things, we misbehave, we go towards evil, we follow our own unbridled desires, and as a result, we have created the world of 2024. Next slide is Azaab of subjugation. The worst form of humiliation is that some nation becomes a subject and slave of other nations. This is what the condition of Bani Israel had been reduced to in Egypt. The nation of Pharaoh had made them their subjects. When the messenger Musa went to Pharaoh, he said to Pharaoh, send forth therefore Bani Israel with us and afflict them not. A very powerful verse, because this is what Quran is telling us, that if you want to come out of this affliction, this suffering, then come to the Quran. This elimination of slavery and subjugation is what the Quran has termed as the changing and replacing of nations, i.e., the replacement of one nation by another. The rare form of this changeover is that a victorious nation turns out the defeated nation from their places of abode and their land, and in their place it establishes itself and occupies their land. It has also happened in the past, but more often the next has happened. But its common form is that the defeated nation loses its wealth and prosperity, and the victorious nation becomes its master. And the first case, we are seeing that it is being done against Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank, that the powerful nation doesn't want them to stay in that land. This is also the replacement of one nation by another nation. The Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen is instructed to come out for jihad in the cause of Allah. Unless you go forth, and this is Allah addressing Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen who have volunteered to become His companions and have committed to follow the verses of the Quran and its guidance. He will punish you with a grievous penalty and put others in your place. And essentially it means that if they go against the Quran, then they will also suffer the same Azaab which the other nations are facing in the world. But him you will not harm in the least, for Allah has power over all things. So the bottom line is to understand the laws of Allah which relate to the rise and fall of nations, and we have gone through this aspect as well previously. This is because the rule of law operates in Allah's system, and this law possesses so much established power that none can tamper in it. In another verse, it is stated, "Behold, you are those invited to spend in the way of Allah." And that is very important, that once we are on this path, then we should never be hesitant in making our resources, whatever are required, available on this path. But among you are some that are miserly, and they hold back because there is a love for money, and people, when they see that there is no immediate benefit for them, they move away. They become reluctant, not realizing that they are going to die one day and there is a hereafter waiting for them, where they will exactly see what they did at that point in time when they, despite having Iman, did not do what the Quran has asked them to do. But any who are miserly are so at the expense of their own selves. So they do their damage to themselves, because then the opportunity is lost. That money still stays with them, but is of no use to Allah. But Allah is free of all wants, and it is you that are needy. If you turn back from the path, He will substitute in your stead another people, then they will not be like you. So if we want the system of Deen to replace the man-made system, then there is a plenty of guidance given over here in a very, very precise manner. Sectarianism is termed as Azaab. Allah has termed the Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen as one ummah and has repeatedly stated that division into parties and sectarianism is kufr and shirk, and its consequence is a humiliating Azaab of destruction and ruin. In Surah Al-Imran, it is stated, "Be not like those who are divided amongst themselves and fall into disputations after receiving clear signs. For them is a dreadful penalty." And this is surprising that Muslims go through these verses, at least the ones who know Arabic and are scholarly, and in any case, they go through these verses and listen to these verses during Ramadan. But they ignore them, and they still remain very firmly within their own sects. They are not willing to give up their sects. There are various forms and manifestations of the Azaab which becomes imposed as a result of mutual dissensions, which the Quran has expressed in Surah Al-An'am in this way. Say, He has power to send calamities on you from above and below, or to cover you with confusion and party strife, giving you a taste of mutual vengeance, each from the other. See how we explain the signs by various symbols that they may understand. Very powerful, evidence-based verse, that all these things happen in our world, and who do it? We do it to our own selves. It is only Allah has related to His own laws. This Azaab has different faces. Sometimes it is the case that vices become commonplace among the upper strata of society, and we can see that in the world of 2024. And as a consequence of these, the society becomes destroyed. Sometimes anarchy spreads among the lower classes and they cause destruction, and sometimes it happens that both these classes become divided into different parties and begin fighting with each other and are destroyed in this way. And this is the state we can see in the world. And if we look at the history of at least last 100 years, we can see how wars, civil wars have affected various societies in the world. And another thing is that when people are divided, they become very vulnerable. And those nations which are very powerful, they make use of that and exploit those divisions. And as a result, make one party, they pay to one party and to create problems in the world. And we have seen under regime changes how all this operates and how all this functions. And as a result, people suffer. Sometimes this destruction appears as a defeat at the hands of other nations. The Jamaat-e-Momineen is instructed that those opponents who have reached to the battlefield against you, fight against them. Allah wishes to make them suffer azab through your hands and to make them humiliated and disgraced in the world. And whole of this, even when Jamaat-e-Mumineen comes into power and establishes themselves, the whole idea is to warn others, to let them know about the laws of Allah and let them know that there is a better way of spending this life. Not only this life, but the life of the hereafter is connected to this life. And all these things, as students of the Quran, we should keep in mind. Next slide is Azaab of fear and grief. But even more soul-destroying is the Azaab in which a sense of fear prevails on the nerves of a nation. The Quran has informed us that the essential outcome of Iman and Salih deeds is, on them shall be no fear nor shall they grieve. So if we recognize fear and huzn in this life, then we need to understand it through this formula of Iman and Salih deeds, and of course by staying together. Such a nation will neither be gripped in the azab of khawf, that is fear, nor will it be infected with the anguish produced by huzn, that is grief. Khawf is commonly created by external dangers, and huzn is that inner state in which man remains engulfed due to anxiety and grief. And the list is very long of all those things which cause this anxiety and grief in the world. This is that Jahannam about which it is stated that in which they will then neither die nor live. La yamutu fiha wa la yahya. It's a horrible state of human psyche, in which man neither remains alive nor does he even die. In another verse, Quran says, death will come to him from every quarter, yet will he not die. And this is the state where wars are imposed on other people. For example, this is the state in which people in Palestine are living, that they don't know when they will be eliminated because they see dead bodies are around them. Iman and Salih deeds keep a nation protected from both these forms of azab. In contrast to this, in Surah Nahl, the Quran has warned in a metaphorical manner. Allah sets forth a parable, a city enjoying security and quiet, abundantly supplied with sustenance from every place. Yet was it ungrateful for the favors of Allah. So Allah made it taste of hunger and terror. That is, through their own hands they created problems. For example, in the West now, all prices are going up without any change in the external world. Why these prices are going up? Because the people in power want these prices to rise. In extremes, like a garment closing in at it from every side because of the evil which its people wrought. Azab of hunger. It is evident that hunger and fear are Allah's azab, i.e., a dearth of rizq and the threat of external dangers. With regard to a dearth of rizq, it has stated in clear words, but whosoever turns away from my message, verily his sustenance is narrowed down, and we shall raise him up blind on the day of judgment. Whoever eschews our laws, his sustenance becomes restricted, and the one whose sustenance is restricted here, that is in this world, is also resurrected blind on the day of judgment. But those who are blind in this world will be blind in the hereafter. The reason is very clear, because the state of the world as of today is because there hasn't been Jamaat-e-Mumineen for a very long time in the world. And since there was none, obviously Shaitan and Iblis did whatever they can do in this world. So all these Muslims who are divided into sects are contributing to this evil in the world. And they should have absolutely no doubt in that if they look at the Quran and they can figure it out and then find the way towards the system of deen. In this verse of Surah An-Nahl, it is stated that nations fall into the azab of hunger and fear due to transgression of nema, that is bounties and blessings of Allah. Because if we look at the world, the resources are far more than the number of people on the planet. It is the distribution of those resources which is causing the problem. And all of these resources, we can even multiply them because science is available to us how to multiply these resources. So it is not the resources or the means of sustenance which is a problem, it is the human psyche, that evil mind which is a problem. The same fact is noted by the Quran at another place in a very dramatic style when it states, "Have you not turned your vision to those who have changed the favor of Allah into rejection and caused their people to descend to the house of perdition?" And we can see that happening right in front of our own eyes in every country on the planet Earth. Into hell. They will burn therein, an evil place to stay in. See the state of the events in 2024, how the leaders of powerful nations are contributing to the destruction of their own people. And I've put inverted commas on own people because there are no own people. They are just people, just mankind. Worldly hell, the word of 2024. It is sufficient to say that the Quran has declared, but of a surety hell will encompass the kafirin. The Quran says that hell is already waiting for you. It is just not yet visible to you. Because whatever we do, for example, today, we are going to reap the good or the bad of it tomorrow. Jahannam is not somewhere far away. It continuously encircles the kuffar in its sphere, and they will not be able to keep away therefrom. And as the students of the Quran, we should be able to very clearly see this, and that is what light means. If we use the Quranic light, then we can see the darknesses of the evil deeds which the human beings do in the world. Even now they are not hidden from its view. It is keeping watch over them. But because veils of ignorance and vested interests are covering their eyes, this is why they cannot see it. What happens in that which is called the day of accountability is that, and hellfire shall be placed in full view for all to see. So in this word, this hellfire is through mutual fighting and wars and conflicts and imbalances in the society and increase in crimes as well. That hell which previously is invisible to the sight bursts into the full view of seeing eyes. Destruction and ruin do not descend on nations unjustly, nor does any nation receive success and ascendancy as bakshish. Bakshish over here means freebies, something getting free. Nothing is free in this world. Human beings have to work for that. In this world of effort and deeds, there is a continuous clash between opposing forces, that is, between haq and batil. And haq is for constructive results, batil is for evil results. We have to look at what we do today and whether the consequences will be good or bad. And Quran helps us to differentiate these things and to look at these objectively. In this clash, the nation which has the ability to remain alive and progress further remains alive and advances ahead. The one which does not contain this potential becomes vanquished and is annihilated. And we can see this process of annihilation going on in the world. This is that fact which the Quran has mentioned in a few concise words in Surah Anfal, that those who died might die after a clear sign, and those who lived might live after a clear sign. Very powerful fact of life. Life and death in relation to nations. This is that very principle for which the Quran is quoted as evidence details of former nations with such focus and emphasis. The aim of describing these details is to inform how the nation holding on to haq and truth remains victorious and successful, and how nations who are flag bearers of the batil system become destroyed and annihilated in such a way that afterwards only the ruins of their destroyed habitations survive to mourn their demise. As has been noted before, these destructions do not appear for no reason. Nations are warned beforehand that the consequence of the system which you have adopted is destruction and ruin. For example, in the case of Gaza and Palestine, this problem is going on for at least 75 years. In fact, this is going on for over 100 years. But in the last 8-9 months, we can see that the whole process has accelerated. because nothing was done in the past to resolve the issue. They are given this warning repeatedly, but when they do not hearken to this and continue to advance on their wrong path, then they fall into that hell about which they were warned. It is stated in Surah Bani Israel, nor would we visit with our wrath until we had sent a messenger to give warning. And we do get plenty of warning through our own deeds. When the wrong results appear before us, that is a warning for us. At another place it is stated, never did we destroy a population but had its warners by way of reminder, and we never are unjust. Now next is law of protection and respite. There is a bit of repetition here, but I thought to leave this slide in because it refers to few interesting points. Just like individuals, nations also have a similar situation. Their power of self-protection increases in relation to the extent to which they engage in constructive work. And as a result, destructive elements do not overpower them. But if the situation is such that the constructive tasks of a nation keep on declining and destructive works and actions keep multiplying, then that nation willingly sets out on the road to decline and ultimately becomes defeated and subjugated, destroyed and annihilated. Those whose scale of good will be heavy will prosper, and then it states those whose scale will be light will find themselves in perdition. This process of scales being lighter or heavier does not reach to its completion in one day. A long duration of time is required for this. This is called the time of respite, or ajal in the language of the Quran. That is the duration, during which there is an allowance and possibility for that nation to once again increase its constructive and protective potentials and save itself from the impending destruction. But for the nation which does not do this, its time of respite comes to an end. And we can see that where these nations of today stand, and the time of respite for some is coming to an end very soon. To every people is a term appointed. When their term is reached, not an hour can they cause delay, nor an hour can they advance it in anticipation. It is stated in response to those people who out of ignorance say that Azaab becomes imposed from the direction of Allah, i.e. there is neither any procedure and law established for it, nor any principle and criterion. He imposes Azaab on whoever he wishes that. What can Allah gain by your punishment if you are grateful and you have Iman? Nay, it is Allah that recognizes all good and knows all things. So this verse makes everything very clear. Finally, three categories of nations in the world. First category is regarding those nations which do not harness the forces of nature. The Quran has declared that the power to harness nature is within the realm of human potentials. Hence, those nations which do not make use of this power cannot even be declared to be included in the domain of humanity. Never mind be counted among nations which are alive. These are commonly nations immersed in religion, before whom everything in the world is to be despised and every attraction is deserving of condemnation. And we hear these kind of statements from people that this world is a dead body, and those who love this world are like a dog or something like that. So these terms are used just to stay away from the arena of life, not to make an effort in the world and do only very little which gets one through this life physically. And that is a very, very adverse kind of mentality, because such nations then remain behind. They are in a state of continuous Jahim. By shunning the paths of life-giving realities, they remain engrossed in the nebulous world of self-concocted holy tales. And we hear all these stories at the level of religion. Category 2, those nations which harness the forces of nature, but instead of employing them under the obedience of the permanent divine values, use them for their own vested interests, the consequence of which is mutual conflict and confrontation among nations. It appears as if these nations are heading towards lofty heights, but this rise of theirs is transitory. And we see, particularly in the West, and of course in China and Russia and those which are developed nations, we see this kind of mentality over there. Disdain of ethical values places a time bomb in the construction of their foundations, and when the time arrives for it to explode, the whole structure of their culture and civilization comes swiftly tumbling down. We should keep in mind that both this category 1 and category 2, there is no scope for self-development, absolutely nothing, no chance. These are purely the physical existence of these nations, and who think that the life will end with death. Continuing, category 3, in the third category are those nations which, having harnessed the forces of nature, utilize its benefits according to the divine values for the general good of the whole of mankind. As long as these nations remain firm on this path, not even a shadow of decline can approach them. Because those who are running this system, they have a self, and that self has acquired new life, which is eternal. Right in this world, they have acquired that eternity, and as a result of that, these people, they follow the values of the Quran, and using the Quran as an external criteria, the whole man-made laws are eliminated from that system, and Allah becomes indirectly through this Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen as the ruler of that system of deen. And this is a lofty concept. The more we think into it, the more of its width and, should I say, vastness becomes appear before us. Details of this can be found at numerous places within the Quran under Iman and Saleh deeds. To conclude, in contrast to the muttaqeen, the other group is of those people who consider the physical life of this world as being the only life. That is why they neither accept the existence of the human self nor are persuaded of the need of the divine values for its development. To gain the benefits of physical life is their aim in life, and using all kinds of tactics for the acquisition of this is their maslak. And maslak is the way of life, their way of living, or their belief system. Until the time that they do not change this fundamental view of life, it makes no difference to them whether they are warned about the dangerous pitfalls of the path or not. They can never come to the right path. The task before those who are looking for guidance of the Quran is to first become mu'mineen, then form a Jamaat or join the one already there. Not joining it is shirk, and then recognize all non-deen forces and their psyche. This is an intrinsic part of their duties. Thanks for your time and for sharing this today. Please feel free to share it with your contacts. You may like to subscribe for future talks related to the Quranic system of Deen. Thank you.